Most buyers think the biggest risk in real estate is moving too slow, but rushing into the wrong decision can create just as many problems. We see this happen more often than people realize. Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Closing the Deal. I am one of your hosts, Zach Dickson, and sitting across from me today is my co-host, Sam Enright. And today we are talking about rushing into decisions and why this is certainly not a good idea. Super excited for today's episode. How are you feeling this morning, Sam?
Feeling pretty good. Excited to be back in the old podcast studio setup. So as you guys, I'm sure can tell, much different than what we've been recording on the last several months. So excited to be back. Excited to bring some value to you guys today, and talk about a topic that I think is really important. One that obviously I feel like we've touched on here and there a little bit so far this year, but one of those things that is definitely worth reiterating, especially when you see it, on a weekly basis.
Absolutely. I feel like, a lot of buyers worry about moving too slow and missing out. Like that's a genuine concern among, first-time home buyers specifically, and what we've seen in our market over the last 4 or 5 years. But there is, another side to that, and moving too fast and making a too quick of a decision that sometimes comes with disappointment, regret, and is definitely something that we see more often than people would realize, I think. And so definitely a good topic of conversation for today's episode. Super excited to get into it for sure.
100%. Yeah, I might actually have an example of this in my own life, so we'll save that for later. But gotta love when you just rush, make emotional decisions, and then things don't work out the way you thought they would.
So let me get started here with the first segment of today's episode, and why in general, why buyers rush and what that decision kind of looks like and why that actually happens. Obviously, first and foremost, especially in this market and in competitive markets as a whole, there is just a fear of missing out, or FOMO, that we've heard that term be thrown around a lot in society, a lot in life, just fear of missing out. And unfortunately, that will lead us to making emotional decisions on specific things. If you go into a property and you see it for the first time and you really, think you like it, and then you get a call and you maybe go backwards a little bit and you decide that you want to sit on it for a little bit. You want to take a 24-hour, 48-hour period to decide if you want to offer on it. And then your agent says, I just got a call from the other agent and now they have 2, 3, 4 other offers. That is going to kind of invoke that feeling of fear of missing out on the property. I've seen it time and time again with buyers, especially in this competitive market. And that just kind of, will push you a little bit further. And I think, in turn, I think that is what sellers are trying to do in these competitive markets by making those phone calls when they have multiple offers. They want to push buyers to put their offer in, maybe, whether it's deliberately or not, they want to get all offers on the table for all, consideration. But what that does to you as a buyer is invoke that fear of missing out. If you did enjoy the property, you did like the property, you think that you might want to put an offer in on it, that is absolutely going to kind of push you in the manner of which to make an offer on the property. And another one is going to be, like I just mentioned, competitive markets. Anytime that there is just competition in the marketplace, you're going to feel like maybe a little bit of regret on your offer. Did you make the very best offer you possibly could? All of those things are going to go into what a competitive market looks like, and feeling like maybe you missed out a little bit in fear of missing out on the property that you would really like to obtain. And then another one's going to be pressure from your timeline. If obviously, if you are in a have 3 months remaining on your lease, this is going to be a pretty expedited timeline, as we've talked about in previous episodes. If you go see a property and you have X amount of time left on your lease and you're kind of up against the 8 ball at that point, that's going to probably put you into a position where you are now making a decision, not even based on your emotions, but based on solely what's in front of you and what you need to have accomplished by said timeline. And again, we've talked about it in previous episodes. The best way to do it is set yourself up for success by preparing yourself in the long run. So if your lease is coming up in 12 months and that you are interested in buying at that point, that now is the perfect time to start preparing for that, not necessarily 3 months, 2 months when you give that 60-day notice to move out. That it's just going to present challenges for you and ultimately is going to put you behind the 8 ball and also maybe again make you rush decisions. And lastly, finishing up this segment, just seeing other homes go into contract, whether that's homes that you've actually offered on or just homes that you're maybe interested in, not even gone to see, or just looking at the market as a whole, seeing homes move as fast as they do in these competitive markets ultimately is going to invoke a feeling in you that you have to kind of be very quick and very decisive with this process. And ultimately in competitive markets, you do need to be decisive, but it needs to be from a place of, confidence and preparedness, like we've talked about in previous episodes, not just being decisive for being decisive's sake and moving because that is how the market is dictating you to move. Again, you don't have to be dictated by the market. You can dictate the market in front of you, even in these competitive markets. And typically, a lot of these rushing decisions usually comes from external pressure and not internal clarity. And so I think you can, just all in all, to wrap up this segment, you can be very decisive without rushing or without feeling like you're making a decision based on, speed and being quick, all of those things.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously a lot of good stuff in there, and obviously just goes to show what we see oftentimes, why these rushes and those sort of things start to happen. And I mean, this can be applicable in all areas of life, right? Normally you feel a sense of moving, a sense to move very quickly, right, from these external factors, whatever that be. And normally, sometimes the best decisions don't always come from that, right? So it's one of those things, trying to be, in control of what you can control. So getting into kind of the next thing here for you guys, what does rushing look like? What is not taking your time? What is not being prepared, look like in different facets of this, this home buying journey, right? So I think, getting started would be, skipping your proper due diligence. There's certain things that need to be done, certain things that need to be put in place when you are going to buy a home. We've talked about this a lot, but, just even something as simple as sitting back and actually creating a budget for yourself of what your payment's going to look like, where your money's going to be going once you do buy this home, and looking at the monthly expenses that are already there. We often hear a lot of people say, hey, I pay this much in rent. I could probably pay another $200 in a mortgage payment and be fine. But there's a lot of things that come along with owning a home that don't necessarily come along with renting, right? If something goes wrong in your home and you rent, the landlord's going to take care of that. In a lot of these cases, depending, I guess, if you're renting a house or an apartment, your landscaping, these sort of things, are going to be taken care of inside of that and not necessarily going to be on you. Once you own your home, everything's on you, right? So all of those expenses have to be taken into consideration. So I think when people do rush, it's one of those things where you kind of toss some of that stuff out the window. You're like, God, we'll just figure it out later, sort of deal. Instead of, taking the time to sit down and do the proper due diligence up front. Another one on our side of things would be not fully understanding your different loan options, getting yourself into a situation where you're kind of, rush through, hey, we need a pre-approval letter in 24 hours and we need to get out here so we can make an offer on this. 24 hours is not a lot of time to do a soft pull, do your income verification, have a very confident clarity conversation, give you the options, and then have you sit down and actually process those options and actually look at them and decide, hey, what is going to be the best fit for me, right? Because in that moment, you're going to see that stuff, but are you actually going to retain that information? Is it actually going to sit with you, or is it going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, that looks good, awesome, yep, let's go to the house and perfect, let's put in an offer. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's one of those things where, I know there's, different rules out there. I've heard things like, if you really want something bad, take a picture of it, put it on your fridge for 30 days. And if you still want it 30 days from now, then go buy it, sort of deal, right? Because a lot of us, I, myself included, have impulse buys. We do things that we feel in the moment. You're like, wow, that looks awesome, I'm going to buy that. Yeah, perfect. And then, 2 weeks later, you're not even using the thing anymore. And it has, it's pretty much worthless at this point. You're like, well, that was, I guess, I don't know. Just don't want it. So, you know what I mean? So it's just one of those things where this is not a purchase. It's one thing to go out and buy $100 item that you really thought you wanted, and now you don't. It's like, okay, yeah, charge it to the game, $100, whatever, move on. But we're talking about $150, $200, $300,000 home that you're locked into for a 30-year mortgage. It's not really something you can just decide later on and say, yeah, wasn't the best decision, but well, whatever. You know what I mean? So that's just one of those things where slowing down, taking a little bit of time, trying to actually understand what it is that your options are, especially on the lending side of things, making sure that you're going into the right loan for you, is another important thing. This is one that I see a lot, is stretching your comfort zone. Maybe you have done the budget numbers, and then you find these homes out there that are flying, they're going off the market quick, just as quick as they're coming on. And then you start to feel this pressure of like, are we going to find something? Are we going to be able to get it in contract? And so then you start maybe stretching it a little bit. Then you start throwing higher offers out there that are going to, largen your monthly payment and stretch your budget past what you were comfortable with. And that feeling isn't, in that moment, is that really a logical decision, or is it an emotional decision, right? Is it churning something inside of you that says, hey, I have to move on this, I'll just make it work, we'll figure it out. And not to say that those situations can't work out. It's just, there's calculated risk, and then there's uncalculated risk, right? There's just kind of throwing caution to the wind and just going off of whatever you feel in that moment. And so we would really hate to, we never want anybody to be house poor. I don't want to do a loan for somebody and all they can afford is making their house payment every month. They can't go out to dinner. They can't get anything for the kids. They can't go on a vacation. They can't do any of that because they are stuck making that house payment every single month. And so that's another thing where I think people in the moment, they're like, yeah, of course we can make that work. That 100% we can stretch the budget and that will be fine. And then 6 months passes, the novelty of the purchase wears off. You've been in the home, and now everything is starting to feel a little bit more real, right? Because in the beginning, it is this thing where you hype it up in your head and hype it up, in your emotions. So another thing that, we see, and then making offers too quickly, getting out there, seeing a home, maybe it doesn't fit all your criteria, but you're seeing, you've looked at other homes and you're looking at Zillow, MLS, Realtor, and these homes that you really like. As soon as they come on the market, within 2 days, they're in contract, and you start to feel that pressure, right? And so the very next house that you see, you're like, yeah, it doesn't really have everything that we want, but if we want to get in, we got to get in. Let me just throw the offer in on there, right? And so it can be one of those situations as well. So just something to consider, when you are feeling those emotions. There's nothing wrong with it. And honestly, let's be real, it's not avoidable. We most of us feel that every single day in our lives when it comes to a multitude of different things. But I think it's really internalizing those emotions, recognizing what they are, what they're bringing out of you in that moment, and understanding that if you were to just wait 5 days, 10 days, normally those emotions are going to pass, and you're going to see it from a more logical standpoint once those emotions have subsided a little bit.
Great points there. Honestly. And it just goes back to what I was kind of wrapping up segment one with. It is really the external factors that kind of creep in and allow these things to happen. Seeing the properties go on the market so quickly and go off as just as quick, and feeling like you have to do that to compete, and not really, having that internal clarity before going into the process. I have a buyer I'm running around with right now, seeing some properties, and they are very, very committed to what they want and what they want to offer on, and I really, really do appreciate that. I think that is going to work out for them in the long run when they do find the property that fits all of their needs and wants at the same time. They're going to be very, very satisfied with their decision versus, being a little bit irrational, and taking in external factors into a decision and making those kind of the focal point of the decision instead of, having that internal clarity. Again, just is going to be a significantly better decision in the long run. And I think, as I get into this next segment here, where the problems show up, that is really where it'll start to set in that, oh, I made an emotional decision, or I made an irrational decision in this home buying journey. And really where this happens is multitude of different places. It can happen, before you even close, throughout the post acceptance contract timeline. Or it can rear its head, when you do close and, like you mentioned, 6 months down the road, I've realized that, hey, I maybe made a mistake on this very, very large financial purchase, and there's no real way to get out of it at this point except for, sell, other than in comparison to a $100, impulse buy that you made at Target the other day. So a good example is going to be, during the inspection, obviously during your walkthrough, you're going to be taking a look at things. If, just for an example, you see on the furnace install date was, 1993. And that, you realize at that point, it's probably going to need replaced at some point, but you decide against it and decide to put in an offer, and then you get your inspection done, and your inspection tells you that you're going to need a new furnace here in the next year or two, or it needs immediately done because it wasn't working properly. And that is something that, again, should have been a consideration when you were making the offer. But if you're feeling like you're rushed or making decisions based on external factors, maybe something that you were willing to overlook at that point. So just going to be something that you're reaping the consequences of because you made that decision in kind of an irrational manner. Again, it could be after the offer is accepted and you get that first mortgage payment done and out of the way, a couple of months down the line, something pops up to where you need to replace it. And now that mortgage payment feels a little bit more tighter because now, obviously, like you mentioned in the last segment, you are a homeowner. You are responsible for all of the repairs, all of the things that go on with this property. And again, it just might feel a little bit tighter now that you have another mortgage payment to make and also other financial responsibilities with this said home as well. So yeah, all in all, I think it might feel good. The decision might feel good initially, and you might be able to overlook some of these things initially. But again, it at some point, if you're overlooking friction, it will show up later. You just want to make sure that you are making decisions based on the internal clarity. Again, want to make sure I reiterate that, you may not find an absolute perfect home that fits everything that you were looking for. But if you feel that internal clarity based on the decision, again, more times than not, you're going to feel confident, prepared, and not have to run into some of these things, whether it's before closing or after closing.
Yeah, for sure. And, we have seen, I have seen this. I mean, it's not a lot of times, but we have seen buyers get cold feet. We have seen buyers go into contract and a week later be like, what have we done? What is going on? I do not feel comfortable with this. And, it's one of those things where it's a risk that you run, and the risk increases the more that you rush. The risk increases the more that you are ill prepared for what this is. We've said this a bunch, but I feel like it's worth saying again. This is a process that is unique, unlike anything else out there. When you are borrowing such a large amount of money, when you are making such a large purchase, I love the idea of everybody buying a home, everybody owning a home, but we have to understand what comes along with that. And we're not here to be, yeah, everybody should just go out and buy. Yeah, everybody should just, that's 100% what we want. Like it's just not reality. It's not going to fit for everybody, and it may not fit for you right now. So don't feel like it's like trying to shove a circular tube into a square hole, or I guess the opposite. A square tube into a circular hole. You're right. It doesn't fit, and I think you got to be aware enough to understand, like, hey, this may not just be the right time, because ultimately you don't want to lead yourself to regrets and being in a position that you cannot get yourself out of. So just slow down, take some time, think about it, make sure that you're steadfast in the decision that you are making.
Absolutely, brother. Absolutely. So why don't you take us into our next segment of our episode here? Tell us a little bit
Yeah,
about the emotional side.
for sure. So, yeah, obviously, I know we've kind of touched on it a little bit here inside of this, but there is a large emotional side to this. And that's, in my opinion, where rushing comes from, right? Most people, again, if you are being honest with yourself, if you're taking inventory of your life and your decisions, I think most people can sit back and say, hey, I rushed this decision, or I came to this conclusion based on these emotions that I was feeling in that moment. And this is a hard thing to, I guess, navigate, because the reality is we all have emotions. Most people are I don't even think you should be capable of turning them off. I think we should all have an emotional side. But I would say most people, again, myself included, have a hard time regulating those emotions from reality versus this is just a feeling that I have inside. This doesn't mean that this is true externally, right? So, what that can lead to is obviously second guessing. So, when you have high emotions, and you are contemplating different things, whether that's buying, whether that's renting, whether that's staying put, whether that's taking the leap and jumping out, there's always going to be that second guessing that is causing friction internally, right? Should I do this? Oh, I don't know. That may not be a good idea. All right, maybe we should do this. And it's like, it's this constant, war. I think of like two people on your shoulder, right? Talking in one ear and talking in the other ear, just back and forth, and it feels like this internal struggle that you're going through. And then there's obviously the stress after you do commit to a decision, right? So some of us we can feel in a moment, this is the right decision. And, we may think that ultimately that we feel 100% inside of us that this is the right decision. And then, a couple of days pass, and all of a sudden, you have these emotions that pop up that you didn't realize were going to be there, right? So there's that side of it as well. And then this is probably the biggest one in all areas of life for people, is fear of making a mistake, right? I've not met too many people that don't fear some level of mistakes, fear some level of failure, fear that in some manner. And that is an internal pressure that we put on ourselves, because we view things, oftentimes we do view things as life or death. Seems a little extreme, but that's kind of the analogy that people use, right? We look at these things as if they are life and death, and oftentimes they are not. So, not to say that if you make a mistake and buy the wrong house, that it's completely undoable, that there's nothing that you can do to get out of it. But, you're going to have to probably stick it out for a little while longer than you probably want to. And there's going to be some sacrifices inside of that. And that's not always going to be a comfortable thing. But that's a huge driver for most people. I know I deal with fears of making mistakes and fear of failure a lot, internally. So, and then obviously pressure, just feeling external pressure, feeling internal pressure, the pressure that we put on ourselves to feel like we need to be somewhere at a certain point in life, or feel like we need to take this next step, or we need to do this, or, hey, I need to get myself out of this situation and into this one. And then there's external pressure. There's pressure from family, there's pressure from friends, there's pressure from social media, from the people that all, feel like, hey, I have to do this to be here, or I have to do this because this is what everybody else is doing, and I don't want to feel behind. And, all these different things, right? I mean, we're such emotional creatures. And I know that this probably seems like we're getting off into something very different than what we're talking about. But this is something that I feel very strongly about, and it's something that I do struggle with myself personally. So I know what that's like to deal with emotions, and have those, and what we can do when trying to create pressure based on not only just internal factors but external factors. So I think ultimately the key takeaway is, we're not trying to eliminate these items, because trying to do that's probably going to drive you crazy, because it's, I think, impossible. But I think it's really understanding that these emotions are normal and regulating them in a way that we don't make decisions just simply based on what we're feeling in that moment. We make decisions based on, what is logical.
Absolutely. And I mean, I couldn't agree more on the fear of making a mistake, in my opinion, and just kind of my, experience. When you start to have that fear of making a mistake and, making a decision based on that fear, it kind of just goes the opposite way. Like the mistake in turn happens because you were fearful of making that mistake. And I think just too many people are scared of making that mistake for, just lack of wanting it to happen, number one. But two, every mistake and every mess up can be a learning experience as a whole. And so to be able to kind of experience those failures, experience those mistakes, even in this large financial purchase of home buying, it can be a learning lesson and allow you to make better decisions down the road. So couldn't agree more with that. And it's just, something, again, like you mentioned, you see in all aspects of life, not just the home buying journey as well. So,
Yeah, 100%.
so wrapping us up here with our final segment. Again, what should buyers do instead of rushing, instead of making, irrational decisions? And it's something, again, that we've talked about so much ad nauseum here in 2026. It's preparation, it's understanding your numbers, it's having clear mental pictures and priorities of what you want. And it's, again, just being very steadfast and confident in your decision making. All of these things can allow you to just feel a certain sense of clarity when you do decide that it is time to write an offer, when it's time to go through the terms of that offer, and feel very, very confident in what you are putting into that legal document there. There's really no other way to explain it other than feeling, tunnel vision type, seeing the end result and feeling like there is nothing, or obviously there's always going to be stuff around you, but kind of just blocking out that external noise, that white noise, when you go to make these decisions, and having internal clarity, feeling confident, feeling prepared, like you did all of the prep work you possibly could before deciding to write this offer, is, in my opinion, is going to produce the best results. It's not always a steadfast, perfect solution. There's always going to be obstacles and things of that nature that you have to face. But when you are prepared, when you are confident, instead of rushing, you are just so much more ready to face those obstacles, and so much more ready to, tackle them as a whole, versus if you rush into a decision and you're kind of letting external factors make the decisions for you. Again, you can dictate your market around you, even if you are in a competitive market where other people are interested in the same homes, just by being confident, by being prepared, and being ready to go when, the time is right. And so I think it's just, the goal isn't speed. You don't want to be as moving as quickly as possible, as fast as possible, 120 miles per hour around the corner. The goal is about commitment, steadfast commitment, and being prepared for when that property that fits your life, fits your journey the best, comes on the market, and you go see it and you're ready to put an offer in at that point. That is the goal, feeling committed, feeling prepared, all of the above.
Yeah, perfect ending there. And I just want to add in, I think it's funny that I think there's a direct correlation to how fast you can actually move when you are prepared and committed. You are going to be able to move a lot faster than you probably think. And I know that that may seem backwards to what we're saying. We're saying don't rush, but it's really not so much about rushing to put an offer in on the first house that you see, or the third house that you see. That's not exactly what we're saying. I think it's more about rushing and taking away your preparedness and everything that goes into a decision like this. And so once you have already checked those boxes, once you have already been prepared, once you've already looked into the numbers, once you've already gotten yourself a priority list, you're able to move a lot quicker and a lot faster on what it is that you actually want than you would otherwise, right? And the difference here is that you're going to feel a lot different in that decision versus rushing in general. And so that's another thing to think about. I've seen that in my own life as well, is just when you are prepared, you can definitely move a lot quicker towards your goals, towards what you're looking for, because you know that you've put the work in or whatever is required in order to get to that place.
And just finishing and kind of
Oh,
following
okay.
up on that thought too, like you just never really know when these opportunities are going to present themselves. You never know when opportunity is going to come knocking at your door. And so to be prepared when that knock does come at the door is really just invaluable. We really can't put a price tag on that at all. So
No, 100%. And I mean, that just brings something like there are clients that we work with, and I truly feel for them. It's just like, it's this thought of, they get on Zillow or they get on Realtor. They're like, we found the perfect house. We want to try to get it. And, maybe we pulled the credit and the credit needs a little bit of credit work. Right. And it's like, I feel in that moment for them, that sucks, but there's another part of me that feels like, man, I really just wish you guys would have reached out 5 months ago and just said, hey, we're considering maybe buying a home down the road when the right opportunity pops up. And maybe it's a fear of feeling like you're going to be sold by the lender, feeling like you're going to be pressured into making a decision in that moment. And that's, and maybe there are people that operate like that. My belief is to help lead people to the best decision that they can make. And so, there's a part of me that wishes that, most clients would reach out. And if they do have credit, hey, boom, let's take care of this 45, 60 days. And then guess what? That next 60 days, when something pops up, you're good to go and you can take it then, instead of that feeling of disappointment when you find something that jumps on the market and you're like, I really want to do this. And then you find out that that's not going to be possible for you. So just something that we do see, and obviously want to try to help bring awareness to that and help as much as we can to avoid those sorts of situations.
for sure, for sure. So wrapping up, again, like we mentioned in the intro, a lot of buyers are really just concerned with moving too slow, especially in these competitive markets. And that is absolutely a concern that is valid. It can cause missed opportunities if you're moving too slow and not getting, the prep work done, the confidence in line. But again, there is something to be said for moving too fast as well. Moving too fast can cause problems that are too big to fix or very, very much harder to fix. Again, will cause regret, will cause disappointment, things that you never, never want to see when associated with such a large financial purchase as a whole. Really, the goal is just to find a balance between the two and find confidence, find steadfast in the decisions that we want to make moving forward. So hopefully you guys enjoyed today's episode, found some value, really enjoyed putting it together for you guys. Sam, is there anything else you want to end the episode with?
No, man, I think we covered it all. So yeah, I think obviously appreciate you guys tuning in. As you guys know, we drop episodes every Friday at noon on YouTube for the video and audio, and then also audio only on podcast platforms, Spotify, and Apple. Yeah, that's the other one. So, and then obviously we do put out content on our socials weekly. We do 3 reels a week, and obviously just appreciate you guys tuning in. Appreciate the support. If you guys ever need anything, we're here. That's all I got for today.
Absolutely, guys. Well, hope you guys enjoyed today's episode, and we will be seeing you guys on the next one. Cheers.